I'm a PhD candidate from the Kühne Logistics University, and my research focuses on the intersection of organizational behavior and humanitarian logistics. The study I present today is about the coordination among humanitarian organizations, and it's a joint work together with Murat Tarakci from the Rotterdam School of Management, Maria Biziou and Niels van Quakebeke, both from the same university as I am. And actually Murat is today here in our discussion round. Thank you, Murat, for joining us and also for your great support of our study. In Haiti, when the earthquake happened in 2010, this earthquake lasted less than 30 seconds, but took more than 300,000 lives and caused huge devastations in the society and in the infrastructures. And in such humanitarian disasters, thousands of humanitarian organizations mobilize and try to provide aid and recovery. However, the funding for the humanitarian sector is very restricted. As you can see in this figure, the gap between the funding that was required and the funding that was ultimately provided increased a lot throughout the last years. So in 2018, you see that actually half of what was required was not provided at the end. However, all this limited resources needs to be allocated among the available humanitarian organizations there to provide aid. And this calls for a very efficient use of the restricted resources, as formulated in the Sustainable Development Goals by the United Nations, that calls for enhanced partnerships for improved global development. To improve the coordination between organizations, humanitarian operations research actually recommends to have clusters, humanitarian clusters, where representatives from humanitarian organizations can gather together, share resources, and exchange information. And they also recommend that these clusters should have a cluster lead. Luckily, this objective finds realization in practice. So what we see is that the United Nations formed already in 2005 clusters, all for different humanitarian sections, such as food, nutrition, or logistics. And all these clusters are chaired by a cluster lead that is knowledgeable in the particular area, and that also acts as a provider, as a last resort in case they're striking resource gaps. So in such clusters, humanitarian organizations find together and have the opportunity to exchange information and resources. However, looking at case studies as well as practitioner reports, we see that the coordination between organizations still poses a major challenge to successful humanitarian operations. In the case of Haiti, for instance, the coordination between organizations even became called a huge failure. So we were wondering, how can that be? Why is coordination still so challenging, despite the existence of a cluster and a cluster lead? And to answer this question, we deployed a multi-method approach. So first, we conducted a qualitative case study, interviewing 21 logisticians from the logistics cluster that have vast experience across various disasters they joined over 10 years on average. And we tried to triangulate these findings from the interviews with respective meeting minutes, which are available on the logistics cluster website. So based on these findings, we then built a simulation to test one of our main findings, which is that the cluster lead's dual role actually impairs trust and coordination among humanitarian organizations. What does that mean? So conducting our qualitative analysis, we found 4 central themes. That is, on the one hand, humanitarian organizations coordinate with each other, but on the other hand, there are still major power struggles between them. And these power struggles even increase dependent on the role the cluster lead plays. So imagine now the situation that humanitarian organizations come together in cluster meetings, and there the representatives want to exchange information as well as material resources. There's huge resource disparity between humanitarian organizations. Most of them are lacking resources, and this is why they approach the cluster in order to get resources. However, the cluster lead possesses most of the times most of the resources and is responsible for the distribution of these scant resources. When then cluster meeters observe, well, we are here to get resources, but we do not get what we want, then they become very frustrated. And this frustration even increases if they observe that the cluster lead plays a dual role. That means the cluster lead is facilitating these meetings, but at the same time, it's also active as a humanitarian organization in the field. That means it might yield an own interest in the resources that are distributed in the cluster. And once cluster members observe that the lead is favoring it itself, then they lose trust in the cluster, and that subsequently impairs coordination between the organizations. On the other hand, seldomly observed though, the cluster lead, the representatives of the cluster lead, sometimes enacted a pure facilitator role, meaning they didn't follow any own agenda, but instead neutrally distributed the cluster resources among cluster members and were facilitating this information exchange. And that led to increased trust. So to sum up, this is the emerging theoretical model from our case study, emphasizing that the role the cluster lead plays is very important in explaining the coordination success between organizations. And furthermore, we've also found that this mistrust not only exists between the cluster lead and cluster members, but also often between international organizations and local organizations, as they are not familiar with each other. And that is, and this is the bad thing about it, this causes information accuracy regarding the needs in the particular country on the side of international agents. Well, we developed these case insights and the theory, but we still were not sure about the actual or specific effect of the cluster lead's different roles on the coordination success in the cluster. And to augment and generalize the theory emerging from our case, we built an agent-based simulation. This is a computer experiment, and since we were not able to go to the field ourselves due to the dangerous nature of such disasters and security restrictions, we built a simulation with agents that represent different humanitarian organizations and the cluster lead and how they interact with each other. So these are the three scenarios of interest we wanted to test. So first, what actually happens if we do not have a cluster lead in these meetings? So what happens if humanitarian organizations purely coordinate themselves? The second scenario is, and this is the interesting one we observed in the case study, well, the cluster lead can also enact a pure facilitator role, that is the cluster lead only facilitating coordination. And finally, how is this distinct from a dual role of a cluster lead, meaning this lead acts as a facilitator, as well as serving its own agenda as an active humanitarian organization, so distributing resources itself to the regions. These are the key parameters of the simulation. So of course we have resources there, material resources, that are distributed to the humanitarian organizations by a disparity factor that is A large disparity factor means most of the resources are concentrated in the hands of a cluster lead, whereas a low resource disparity factor means the distribution of resources is more equal. Second, the organizations have beliefs regarding the needs assessment of the regions in this affected country. And these beliefs become less accurate the more regions they focus on. And third, they have, as we observed in the case study, they have trust relationships regarding these among each other. So either they trust each other or not. And if they trust each other, then they exchange resources with each other. So very briefly, because due to time restrictions, here's the process that the agents go through. So first, the cluster lead is organizing an information exchange between agents. And second, each agent has the chance to exchange resources with each other and to partner with each other, coordinate with each other. Agents further observe if they get what they want from their partners, and if they see, well, my partner has what I need, but it's not giving it to me, then they quit these partnerships. So, and finally, the results that confirm what we found in the case study. So on the y-axis, you see the percentage of needs met, and on the x-axis, the resource disparity. And here are the three scenarios of interest. And what you see is the pure facilitator actually outperforms the dual role, even though the dual role is providing loads of resources to these countries, to the affected country. Two mechanisms are driving these results. So first, on the left side, you see the amount of relationships, trust relationships, the leads are able to maintain. And here you see that the pure facilitator is actually better able to maintain trusting relationships between organizations that then ultimately improves coordination. So more needs are met. And right on the right side, you see that it also more efficiently uses the resources that are available in the cluster. Of course, it would be boring if we could only say that the pure facilitator is always better. No, we were also able to delineate the boundary conditions to the cluster leads performances. And here we see that a dual role is actually equally successful if the cluster suffers initial trust between each other. And furthermore, if the scope of regions, humanitarian organizations altogether possess in the cluster is too confined, too small, then again, they need the help of a cluster lead, and then actually the cluster lead with a dual role performs better.
Yeah, you have about 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes, okay, thank you. So then please, I will skip this and go to the contributions of our study. So here we were also eager to contribute to make multidisciplinary contributions. So first to humanitarian operations, where we can confirm, well, yes, coordination improves if we have a cluster and a cluster lead, but one should scrutinize the different roles this cluster lead can play, emphasizing the benefits of a pure facilitator approach. So thereby, we are also able to contribute to research on power struggles, as well as on intra-organizational relationships, where we spotlight international, especially the relationships between local and international agencies that need to be cured in order to be successful in the collaboration. Thank you very much for your attention.